Ethan had always lived a quiet life. He worked in a small repair shop in town, fixing bicycles and machines for neighbors. He was not a man who searched for adventure. Most evenings after work, he took a long walk home through the empty road that ran past the woods. It was his way to clear his mind, to listen to the crickets and the rustling of the trees. Nothing strange ever happened in his life. He liked it that way. But one night, everything changed. The air was calm, and the moon shone above like a silver lamp. Ethan walked with his hands in his pockets, whistling softly. Suddenly he saw a streak of light across the sky. At first he thought it was just a shooting star. But this light was different. It was larger, brighter, and instead of disappearing, it curved downwards. He could see it cutting across the night like a fireball. Then in the distance he heard a loud crash. The ground trembled slightly beneath his feet. His heart raced. He froze for a moment, unsure if he should run toward it or away. His curiosity won. He moved quickly into the woods, his boots crunching on dry leaves. He followed the glow in the distance, weaving between the tall trees. The smell of burning filled the air. His chest tightened with fear and wonder. He had never seen anything like this before. When he finally reached the place, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, half buried in the earth, was something he could not explain. It looked like a pod, smooth, shining faintly, its surface marked with strange patterns that shifted like liquid metal. Smoke curled from cracks along its sides. It pulsed with light as though alive. Ethan's breath caught. This was no piece of metal from an airplane or any machine he had ever known. Then he heard a sound. A soft whimper. He stepped closer carefully, his hands trembling. The pod's side had split open, revealing an interior filled with faint blue light. Inside, curled in a protective seat, was a child. But this child was not like any he had ever seen. Her skin glowed faintly as if lit from within, and her eyes, wide and full of fear, shimmered like liquid silver. She looked no older than 8 or 9, but there was something otherworldly about her. Ethan's first thought was that she might be hurt. He reached forward slowly. She flinched, but did not run. Her small hands clutched the edge of the broken pod. Ethan crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. "It's okay," he whispered softly, not even sure if she understood him. "I won't hurt you." The girl blinked, her glowing eyes reflecting his face. For a moment the world was silent, except for the faint hum of the broken pod. Before he could say more, a sharp noise came from deeper in the woods. A snapping of branches, then another. Ethan turned his head quickly. Shadows moved between the trees. At first he thought maybe it was the wind, but then he saw them. Figures, tall and menacing, with strange armor that gleamed in the dark. Their movements were too precise, too fast, not like animals. They were searching for something. The girl suddenly made a small, frightened sound. She pointed weakly toward the figures and then clung to Ethan's sleeve. In that instant, Ethan understood. They were hunting her. His heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know who these beings were or why they were here, but one thing was clear. If he left the girl, she would not survive. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. He was just a simple man. What could he do against creatures like these? But when he looked at the child's trembling hands holding onto him, something inside him hardened. He could not walk away. He reached into the pod, lifted her carefully into his arms and pressed her against his chest. She was surprisingly light, her skin warm and glowing faintly against his shirt. "Hold on," he whispered. The sound of the hunters grew louder. Ethan moved quickly, slipping away into the trees. His boots pounded against the dirt as he tried to stay quiet but fast. He ducked low, weaving between thick trunks, the girl's arms tight around his neck. Behind him, he could hear sharp clicks and metallic echoes. They were following. Every step felt heavier. But Ethan pushed forward. He knew these woods better than anyone. He had walked them for years, exploring paths and hidden corners. That knowledge was his only advantage now. He slipped into a narrow path between 2 fallen logs, crouched low under branches, and pressed himself against the shadows. The hunter's footsteps drew closer, their shapes visible in the moonlight. Strange weapons glowed faintly in their hands. Ethan held his breath, trying to keep the child calm. He felt her shiver against him, but she made no sound. Slowly, the figures passed, scanning the ground, but they did not look in his direction. When they moved further away, Ethan exhaled, his body shaking with relief. He waited until the sounds faded, then moved again, deeper into the forest. He had no idea where to go, but he knew he had to keep moving. The girl pressed her glowing face into his shoulder, as if she trusted him completely now. That trust made him run faster. Finally, after what felt like hours, he reached a small clearing, where the trees bent low. He crouched behind a large boulder, setting the girl down gently. She looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold the stars. Ethan wiped the sweat from his brow. His chest burned from running, but he forced a smile. "You're safe now," he said softly. He didn't know if she understood, but she reached out her hand and touched his, her fingers small and warm. For a moment there was a quiet bond between them. The night was not over. He knew the hunters would still be searching. He knew he had stepped into something far beyond his understanding. But he also knew one thing for certain. He could not abandon her. Whatever she was, whoever she was, he had made a choice the moment he picked her up. That night, under the cold stars, Ethan sat with the strange child beside him, watching the shadows in the trees. The world he had known, simple, ordinary, quiet, was gone. Something new had begun, and deep down, though he could not explain why, he felt that his life would never be the same again. The night grew colder as Ethan sat in the clearing with the glowing child pressed against his side. The forest was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the distant rustle of leaves, the soft hum of insects. But all he could focus on was the thought that the hunters were still out there. Every crack of a branch in the distance made his muscles tense. The child clung to him tightly, her eyes wide and shimmering like silver pools. She trusted him, though she barely knew him, and that trust gave him strength. He knew he couldn't stay in one place for long. If those hunters were as skilled as they looked, they would eventually find his trail. He had to keep moving. But where could he go? He couldn't take her back to town. No one would believe him, and even if they did, how could ordinary people protect her against creatures like those? He needed to rely on the only thing he had, his knowledge of the forest. "Come on," he whispered softly, lifting her into his arms again. She didn't resist. Instead, she rested her small head against his shoulder, her faint glow lighting his path. Ethan adjusted his grip and moved carefully through the trees. The woods were thick, but Ethan knew every hidden trail, every hollow, every secret passage. When he was younger, he had spent countless hours exploring, sometimes even camping alone. Tonight, those old habits became his only hope. He moved quickly but silently, stepping where the ground was soft, avoiding twigs that could snap under his boots. The girl stayed quiet, her breathing steady. Behind them, faintly, came the clicking sounds again. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. The hunters hadn't given up. He could almost feel their presence moving closer. Their strange weapons glowed softly in the darkness, scanning the forest like searching eyes. He crouched low, pressing himself, and the girl against the ground, hidden behind a fallen log. The girl looked up at him, her silver eyes full of fear. Ethan pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. She nodded, understanding more than he expected. Together, they stayed perfectly still as the hunters passed, their heavy steps vibrating through the earth. Ethan could hear the strange rhythm of their breathing, harsh and unnatural as if filtered through machines. One of them stopped suddenly. Ethan's heart nearly stopped too. The hunter turned its head, scanning the area. The glow from its weapon swept across the trees, moving dangerously close. Ethan held his breath, every muscle screaming to move, but he didn't. The child's small hand gripped his tightly. Seconds felt like hours. Then finally the hunter moved on, following the others deeper into the woods. Ethan exhaled slowly. That had been too close. He knew now that hiding alone wouldn't save them. He needed a plan. Carrying the girl again, he headed toward the old part of the forest where caves and rocky hills offered more places to take cover. As he moved, he noticed the girl trying to communicate. She tapped his chest lightly, then pointed toward the sky. Her glowing fingers drew small shapes in the air, symbols that faded quickly. Ethan didn't understand the meaning, but he guessed she was trying to tell him where she came from. He wished he could ask her questions, but all he could do was nod to show he was listening. Hours passed as he ran, hid, and doubled back to throw off the hunters. The moon shifted higher, then began to sink. Dawn was still far away, but exhaustion tugged at Ethan's body. His legs ached, his arms trembled from carrying the child, and his throat was dry. Yet he pushed on. Each time he thought of stopping, he looked at the girl. She was depending on him completely, and that gave him strength he didn't know he had. Finally, he reached a rocky ridge. A narrow path led up to a hollow cave hidden behind a curtain of vines. He had found this place years ago while hiking, and few people even knew it existed. It was the perfect place to rest, at least for a while. He ducked inside, his shoulders brushing against the cool stone. The cave was small, but safe, with a dry floor and a narrow opening that would be easy to guard. He set the girl down gently. She looked around curiously, her glow lighting up the walls with a faint blue shimmer. Ethan sat heavily on the ground, breathing hard. His chest rose and fell as he wiped sweat from his brow. The girl knelt beside him, her hands moving again, in those strange symbols. This time she placed her hand on her chest and then pointed upward. Then she touched his chest and repeated the gesture. Ethan understood a little more now. She was saying she was from the stars, and she saw him as connected to her somehow. He gave her a small smile, though inside his mind was spinning. How could he possibly protect a child from another world? What had he gotten himself into? Before he could think too deeply, a sound echoed outside the cave. The hunters were still searching. Ethan stiffened and pulled the girl close. He peeked. Through the curtain of vines, his eyes narrowing. The shadows of the hunters moved across the forest floor, their glowing weapons scanning the rocks. He felt a surge of determination. He couldn't just hide forever. If they found this cave, there would be no escape. He needed to outsmart them. He looked around the cave quickly and found a loose rock the size of his hand. Quietly, he slipped out the back of the cave where the opening was smaller. He moved through the brush, circling behind the hunters. With careful aim, he threw the rock far into the trees on the opposite side. It struck loudly against another stone. The sound echoed, sharp and clear. The hunters turned immediately, their glowing weapons raised, moving toward the noise. Ethan used the distraction to slip back into the cave. He pressed his finger to his lips again, signaling the girl to stay silent. Together, they waited as the hunters passed the cave, moving toward the false sound. When the forest grew quiet again, Ethan felt a wave of relief. He leaned back against the cave wall, closing his eyes for a moment. The girl crawled closer, resting her small hand on his arm as if to comfort him. Despite everything, he smiled. The danger was far from over. He knew the hunters would return, and eventually they might find him. But for now, he had given them both a little more time. And in that time, he had made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened, he would not let them take her. As the night stretched on, Ethan sat awake, listening to the sounds of the forest, planning his next move. The girl leaned against him, finally falling asleep. Her soft glow filled the cave like a tiny star. Ethan stared at her, realizing that this night had changed his life forever. He was no longer just a man walking home. He was a protector, carrying a secret that no one else in the world could imagine. And as he closed his eyes briefly, gathering his strength, one thought burned in his heart. Whatever these hunters wanted, they would have to go through him first. The first rays of dawn touched the forest when Ethan finally let himself breathe easier. The girl was still asleep, curled close to him, her faint glow keeping the cave from complete darkness. He had stayed awake the whole night, listening for the hunters, but somehow they had not returned. He hoped they had moved farther away, but deep down he knew they would never stop searching. When the girl stirred, she opened her shimmering eyes and looked at him with silent gratitude. She reached out and touched his hand, and though she said nothing in words, Ethan understood her meaning. She trusted him. That silent bond gave him courage. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air outside. It wasn't the sound of the hunters. It was different, deep, powerful, and smooth, like the sky itself was vibrating. Ethan stepped to the mouth of the cave and pushed aside the vines. His breath caught in his throat. High above the trees, the sky split with light. A colossal ship descended, so vast it blocked out the sun. Its surface shone like liquid silver, covered with patterns that shifted and shimmered like the ones on the girl's pod. It moved slowly, silently, until it hovered above the clearing. The hum filled the earth, making the rocks tremble beneath Ethan's feet. The girl stood beside him now, her eyes wide, her small hand clutching his arm. She wasn't afraid. She was hopeful. Ethan realized this was her people. This was who she had been waiting for. The ship's underside opened, and a beam of light streamed down, bright but soft, like a column of the purest dawn. From it, a figure descended slowly. She was tall, graceful, and unlike anyone Ethan had ever seen. Her presence filled the air with calm and power. Her gown flowed like liquid starlight, and her crown seemed woven from silver and crystal. Her eyes glowed the same silver as her daughter's, but deeper, older, filled with wisdom. Ethan knew instantly. This was the girl's mother. This was the queen. The child let go of Ethan's arm and ran forward into the light. She leapt into the queen's arms, and the queen held her tightly, her expression softening with relief. It was a reunion so pure, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. For a moment it was as though nothing else in the world mattered. Then the queen's eyes turned to Ethan. She stepped forward, her daughter still in her arms, and the beam of light followed her until she stood before him. Her gaze was sharp, yet kind, powerful, yet gentle. When she spoke, her voice was not heard with ears but inside his mind, clear and steady. "You saved my daughter." Ethan's breath caught. He nodded slowly, unsure what to say. I just did what anyone would have done." The queen's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "No. Many would have turned away. Many would have left her. You risked your life against my enemies. In our ways, that is not a simple act. It is a bond, one that cannot be broken." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't fully understand, but he could feel the weight of her words. The queen reached out her hand, placing it lightly on his shoulder. A warmth spread through him, not just in his body, but deep within his soul. For a moment, images flashed in his mind, visions of her world, vast cities floating in the skies, oceans of crystal, and a throne where she sat alone, carrying the burden of her people. And then, the image of her daughter, always at risk, always hunted by those who wanted to harm her. The visions faded, and Ethan stood trembling. The queen's eyes glistened. "You are tied to us now, to her, to me." He didn't know what to say. His simple life, his quiet days. How could he ever be part of something so vast? But when he looked at the child, safe now in her mother's arms, he felt something stir in his chest. He had protected her, and he would do it again. The queen seemed to sense his thoughts. She nodded softly. "You have a choice, Ethan. To walk away and return to your quiet life, or to stand with us forever." Ethan stood in silence, his heart pounding. He had no answer yet, but he knew his life had changed forever. The queen and her daughter remained on Earth longer than Ethan expected. They stayed hidden, their great ship cloaked above the skies. Ethan found himself drawn to them, learning more each day. The queen was not only powerful, but also deeply human in her emotions. She spoke of her people, of the enemies who wanted her throne, and of her daughter's importance to the survival of their kind. Ethan listened, trying to understand. Each word pulled him deeper into their world, and though he struggled, he began to feel something he hadn't in years: purpose. One evening, as the three of them sat near the cave, the Queen looked at Ethan. "You doubt yourself," she said gently, her voice in his mind. Ethan chuckled nervously. "I'm just a man who fixes bikes and walks through the woods. I'm not a warrior. I'm not chosen." The Queen shook her head slowly, her silver hair catching the faint light. "It is not strength of arms that makes one chosen. It is the strength of heart. When others would have run, you stayed. When danger came, you shielded a child who was not even of your world. That is rare. That is power." Ethan looked down, embarrassed, but her words warmed him. The girl leaned against him, smiling softly, as though she understood too. As days passed, Ethan began to see more. The Queen showed him visions of her world, teaching him small pieces of their ways. She revealed her loneliness as a ruler, burdened with endless decisions, surrounded by power but starved of genuine trust. And in those moments, Ethan saw her not just as a queen, but as a woman who carried great weight on her shoulders. Slowly, something grew between them. It was not rushed, not forced, but it was real, a bond of trust, of shared strength, of silent understanding. Yet Ethan still hesitated. He would walk alone at night, staring at the stars, wondering if he was worthy of what she was offering. Could he truly leave his world behind? Could he belong to something so far beyond himself? One night, as he stood in the clearing, the Queen approached. "You are afraid," she said softly. Ethan sighed. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be." The Queen stepped closer, her eyes shimmering like starlight. "I do not ask you to be more than you are. I only ask you to stand beside me. Together we will be enough." Her words struck him deeply. For the first time, he let himself believe it might be true. The hunters returned one last time. It was a night filled with chaos, the forest lit by strange lights, their weapons blazing with energy. Ethan and the Queen stood together, shielding the child. Ethan fought not with weapons but with courage and cleverness, using the forest itself to outwit their attackers. Each time he thought he could not go on, he looked at the girl's face and found strength he didn't know he had. Finally, with the Queen's power unleashed, the hunters were driven back, disappearing into the dark skies. The battle was over. The forest fell silent again. The Queen turned to Ethan, her daughter clinging safely to her side. Her voice was steady, though her eyes held emotion. "It is time to choose." Ethan looked at his hands, rough from years of ordinary work. He thought of his quiet home, his simple shop, the life he had always known. Then he looked at the girl, at the Queen, at the vast ship waiting in the skies. He realized the truth. His old life was gone. He had stepped into something greater, and his heart already belonged here. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "I choose to stay. I choose you." The Queen's eyes softened. She reached out, placing her hand on his chest, and warmth filled him again. The child ran to his side, holding his hand tightly as though she had known all along what he would decide. Together they walked toward the beam of light. The ship welcomed them, its doors opening like the embrace of a new world. As they rose into the sky, Ethan looked down at the forest one last time. The life he had once known was gone, but in its place was something greater. He was no longer just an ordinary man. He was protector, partner, and part of a family that stretched beyond the stars. And as the stars surrounded him, Ethan felt no fear. He felt only peace and the certainty that his life, though unexpected, had found its true path, forever by the side of the alien Queen and her daughter.